The today's launched Sony A7V is maybe one of the coolest cameras I have seen in a while. Hi, my name is Levi. I'm a Swiss wildlife photographer and also Sony Alpha creator. Last week I had the chance to test the new Sony A7V in the Swiss Alps, and in this short review I would like to share some of my thoughts whether it might be a good camera for wildlife and nature photography. First of all, as a Sony user, I'm not going to compare this camera with any other brands. I simply want to share some of my experiences and give you my thoughts on where it fits within the Sony ecosystem of cameras. So before I talk about my personal experiences in the field, here are some of the most important facts about the new camera. After the Sony A7 IV, this is now already the 5th version of the very famous A7 line. Like its previous model, it has a 33 megapixel sensor. However, it's a new one and is now a partially stacked sensor. This brings improvements such as reduced rolling shutter, but also improved autofocus performance and more reliable tracking. It also comes with an improved stabilization of 7.5 stops, and it also has a new AI white balance, which should keep the colors even more natural. It also offers blackout-free 30 frames per second and even pre-capture up to 1 second. I think that's an amazing improvement. It's actually the same as the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, if I'm not wrong, and that's just very helpful when it comes to action photography, especially bird photography, for example. So I'm gonna talk about my experience later in that video. Talking about filming, there are some important improvements too. We now finally have the 4K 120 frames, but keep in mind that this is still with the crop, but we also have 60 frames without the crop. Another nice addition is the ability to import LUTs on the camera, and we now also have flexible ISO and S-Cinetone. Let's also quickly talk about the handling. So the grip is slightly larger than the Sony A7 IV. Especially during longer shoots, you might feel the difference. We now also have the new monitor, which we have seen with previous models. I think that was a must. And what remained the same to the Sony A7 IV is that we only have one CF Type A slot. The other one is still SD card. I would have preferred to have two CF Type A, but I think we can live with that. And yeah, then we now also have two USB-C ports. One is for charging and the other one is for exporting images. And I think that's mostly it about the handling. Let me know in the comments if I forgot anything about that. Let's move on with some more improvements which I think are worth mentioning. Sony says that the battery life is up to 20% longer. So I didn't really test it one-to-one to the Sony A7 IV. But if this is true, this is very helpful, especially for nature photography. Sony also mentions additional improvements in connectivity, such as 4K 30 frames live streaming and enhanced Wi-Fi speed and stability. I honestly haven't tested this, but it's nice to have. Before the personal experience, let's talk about the price. So the Sony A7 V will be 2,600 Swiss francs. That is less expensive than the Sony A7 IV, which launched at 3K. And I think that is very nice and also the only right move for Sony, because now we have a clear gap between the Sony A7 series and the Sony A7R series. And yeah, it just provides a relatively affordable camera that still delivers very, very good quality. Now let's talk about my favorite part, and this is my personal experience after using the camera for around 5 days in the field. And when looking at all these improvements which I just mentioned, there are actually just a very few which I think are very important for me personally as a wildlife and nature photographer. And of course, first of all, having pre-capture and 30 frames per second is a huge improvement to the Sony A7 IV and makes this camera now a very interesting one for wildlife and bird photography. I'm also very happy about the 4K 120 frames. I don't really care a lot about the crop because I shoot with the big telelenses anyway. and the crop even gets me a little bit closer to the subject. Last but not least, I want to talk about a topic which is very important for me because I shoot a lot in low light situations. And my main camera, the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, has 50 megapixels, so it's not the best performance in low light situations just because of the high megapixels. So I was very keen to see how the Sony A7V works. And to be honest, I can't really tell so much about this because there's a simple reason, but also a little bit of stupid reasons. By the day I'm uploading this video and by the day the camera is launched, there is no chance for me to look at the raw files. No Lightroom, no Photoshop, no Sony Imaging Edge app can open the files. So I shot a few days everything in RAW. I had some very nice moments shooting the tawny owl in low light situations. And I even did some comparisons between the Sony A7V and the Sony A7 IV. And I would really love to share them with you. But right at the moment I can't. That's also why I can't really talk a lot about the difference. But what I will do is in the description, the first link, you will find all the raw files. And I hope within the next few days, you will be able to open them in all the different apps. So you can just download them, wait a few days, and then you just can make the comparison by yourself. There should be an improvement, hopefully, but right now for me it's a little bit hard to say because all the images which you saw in this video are shot on JPEG, what also makes it a little bit hard to really see all the details. Alright, so as someone who has used the Sony A7 IV for more than a year and now also the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II for quite some time, I think that the Sony A7V is somewhere in between. So I think that it has very good autofocus, 30 frames per second, pre-capture. That's all stuff which you will only find with flagship cameras, or you only found it so far in flagship cameras. And I think that is a very nice thing. At the same time, there are some limitations, but considering that it only costs half of the price or less of the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, for example, I think it's a very good deal, and probably it's going to be something like the new standard camera for any kind of photography. So that's it for this very short personal review about the Sony A7V. I'm curious if I forgot anything important. It is possible because I didn't really have a lot of time to test everything in detail, but I just wanted to share some of my first impressions as soon as possible. Also, let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the camera, and also what is your personal opinion. I'm very interested to discuss a little bit. And yeah, thank you very much for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.